This time on Poll Hub, we have a brand new poll with our partners at NPR and the PBS NewsHour. It is our first post-election poll, and we asked a lot of questions. We asked Americans about Biden and Trump and the election, the pandemic, and some other stuff. So, you know what? I'm just going to shut up. Let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
I'm Lee Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
Pity the students who had to ask all of these questions in this poll. It was a long survey, and we asked a lot of things, a lot of questions about a lot of things. I think one of the big headlines, and we mentioned this at the open, was we asked about the election, and specifically because Donald Trump still has not conceded, he still is making the false claims that there was widespread fraud in all kinds of states and that he really won the election. We asked a question about whether people think the election results are accurate. Let's start there, because I think that tells us maybe where America is right now in a lot of ways, too.
Well, 61% of Americans actually think that the results of the 2020 presidential election were accurate and were legitimate. And almost two-thirds, 65%, think that President Trump should formally concede the election to President-elect Joe Biden. That said, there's certainly a healthy proportion of Americans who do not see the election as legitimate. I mean, if we say 61% think it is, we actually see that 34%, one-third of Americans think that it was not. And, that's a very, very notable proportion, to say the least.
And that's a lot of people who are clearly Donald Trump supporters. I mean, I guess, depending on how you look at it, it was on the question of whether you should concede. 32% of Trump supporters think he should, which I guess is either a third full or two-thirds empty, depending on how you want to look at it. I mean, I thought it was kind of a large number, but then again, I don't know. When I think about all this, I got to think, what is Donald Trump up to? Here's a guy, nothing but wanting to win. This is his whole thing. His whole MO is winning. And now these court cases are like, whatever, 1 for 50 or something like that. And, maybe he's saving the best for last with the Supreme Court, appeal by the Texas Attorney General and others around the country. But what is Donald Trump been up to that he's been fueling this notion of it's not legitimate and I'm not conceding? What do you guys think?
Well, there's nothing that he likes less than being tagged a loser, and he lost the election. So I think ego has been the central defining characteristic of this presidency, and I don't think that's changing even in the waning days of it. One of the things about this question, do you trust that the results of the 2020 election are accurate or not, that stood out is what we've seen all along: a big partisan difference with only a quarter of Republicans, actually 24%, saying that they believe it's accurate. But I was a little struck when you break it down a little bit, when you get into the numbers, that there was very little difference across age groups, across generations, not a huge difference in gender, not a lot of difference anywhere except in this one question of party identification. 95% of the Democrats think it's accurate, 67%, about two-thirds of independents, but only 24% of Republicans. It just really, we've talked about this partisan divide in so many questions, but this one, it is only about the partisan divide. There's no other way to slice and dice this other than this partisan divide. If you're a Republican, 75% of them believe, basically, 72% believe that these results are not accurate, despite all evidence presented in court and turned away by judges to the contrary. I think that's stunning.
Well, also, I mean, I think part of what we've seen over the Trump presidency is, a very strong core of support. An interest by the president to be able to connect with his supporters, both in rallies, in terms of fundraising, and a whole host of different issues. And I think in terms of, Lee, you asked the question, well, why? I think it's still, I think it still provides the limelight. It still provides exciting rallies, whether people see that as entertainment or as a serious endeavor to overturn the election. I think there's probably a mix of both. The president, didn't get 50% of support in the election. 61% of Americans believe that his loss is legitimate. So I think there's quite a number of Americans who voted for the president, who still say that we need to move on and recognize that President-elect Joe Biden is going to take the oath of office at the end of January.
But we've had 4 years of Donald Trump and nothing has been normal. I guess his last act is not going to be normal either.
Well, nothing. Things have not been traditional.
Okay, traditional.
Okay, things have not been traditional, and so
I'm with you, Lee. I would have gone with normal, but okay, sure.
Yeah, but I'll tell you. But let's talk about this for a second. What is, and we can move on from this, but what is the long-term damage to the democracy if we're going to have elections where evidence notwithstanding, someone clearly has lost and is not willing to move on, and that person happens to be the president of the United States, which makes it sort of newsworthy. If this were a state senator in upstate New York, I don't think people would care as much, but this is a big deal, and I'm concerned about whether we've broken new ground here. In terms of
well, certainly.
damage.
Certainly you can call it precedence, but I also think this is an awful lot about Donald Trump. And right now it is Donald Trump's, Republican Party. I think more concerning for me is the fact that that the Washington Republicans, not so much the rank and file Republicans, the local Republicans, but the Washington Republicans have continued to support his position that he does in fact still have a pathway to winning the presidency. So in that sense, Lee, I do agree with you that I think that is disturbing. But right now it is Donald Trump's Republican Party. I don't know if there's actually another candidate that could pull this kind of thing off. We've never seen anything like this in the past. We may be one and done here. So I certainly there's a question about to the degree that the transition was thwarted. What are the implications for moving forward? I think there are pretty significant issues on the table, that we've talked about, and we've also done some polling
on
here
the transition.
as well.
Yeah.
But before we move on to that, though, since we're talking about Trump, I just want to point out one other question we asked, which was about Trump running in 2024. And while 60% of Americans don't think he should run, a majority of Republicans do, majority of Democrats don't. I do think there's one notable thing in here, which is we asked the Trumpiest of the Trump people, his supporters, do you think he should run or not? 22% said he shouldn't run again in 2024. So that one drew me. I thought that was a big number. So I just think it's worth noting that before we move on to Biden, who we should be talking about because he's the president-elect.
Although if you do think about the primary season and how that works during the spring, how that will work rather during the spring of 2024, 67% of Republicans, self-identified Republicans, saying that they would like to see him run again, certainly makes for some interesting speculation about what we might see. And if I were Rubio or Cruz
or Cotton or
right, every other Republican who has their eye on the presidential prize, I think I'd be.
But
worried.
It's a long way off, and we do have a president-elect who probably wants to get a little bit of attention from us here, since we asked a lot more questions. Yeah, we asked more questions about Biden and the transition than we did about Trump. We did ask about a whole series of issues and how confident they are that he can handle these things. And top of that list, coronavirus, not a surprise. Throughout the election, he led Trump by significant margins in people's trust in his able to handle it. No surprises here. Were there any surprises in any of the other questions? He was above 50% among registered voters with everything, all of the things we asked.
Jay, I think that was the surprising part of this. I think Americans, to some degree, are accepting what he was offering during the campaign, and that he was going to try to unify the country, get things working together, represent all people, and obviously deal with the coronavirus and provide leadership and things along those lines. But the fact that there is, in a time where we've talked, almost every podcast about the polarization that exists and how the country's evenly split. Look, he's not going to get a honeymoon in the first 100 days. Like, we're done with stuff like that. This is
the honeymoon is over, literally.
Yeah, literally. Yeah. But nonetheless, the country is willing, I think, in these numbers, to give him some benefit of the doubt, a point of departure. Numbers much better than Donald Trump had 4 years ago during the same period, in terms of handling the transition and unifying the country,
Yeah,
and a whole host of
jump in
things.
with
Yeah.
that, Lee. That's a good point, because the majority of registered voters, 56%, do approve of how Biden is handling the transition. And I think the point you're making here too is that it's not that the other 44% disapprove, 29%
Sure.
disapprove,
That's a good
but
point.
16% actually said they were unsure. So giving the president-elect a little bit of a wait and see.
And if he wins half of them over, all of a sudden he's in the 60s. We don't talk about 60s as percentages in polls. I mean, it's hard to get there right now in terms of the country. So I think, when all is said and done, I think, that these are pretty decent numbers for President-elect Biden, and gives him a point of departure as he is going through this process of selecting nominees for the cabinet position, and the diversity that he has sort of promised in that balancing act between more establishment Democrats and more progressive Democrats, and great diversity. I think he's getting good grades for that as well. I mean, I think it's an interesting first phase for him, despite the lack of legitimacy and all that we've talked about.
I do think it's worth noting, though, that the bottom end of this scale, the top is coronavirus, the bottom end is the economy. And I think those are the two things we're going to be talking about for the next 6 months. Hopefully not more than 6 months, but who knows at the rate we're going. And this is how his presidency begins. It's the barbell, it's the barbells, right? And he's got to balance this. There's the economy and coronavirus, and Americans trust him the most on coronavirus and the least. Again, 50% of registered voters, but it's still 50% on the economy. How does he negotiate that? How does he get around that? Considering the challenges that he's going to face from a divided Senate, a Senate that, even if it's Democratic controlled after the Georgia elections, the House is close. I mean, nothing's going to be easy. So how does he get through that?
But people in this poll say they want that government hasn't done enough during this period of the coronavirus in terms of the economy. And they also say they very much want the folks in Washington, the political leadership, to compromise. Let's get past the logjam. Let's get past the this frustration and dysfunction, and let's get people trying to work together. The country is there. Biden is there. You're asking, can he get Congress to play along? And that that is the big question, I guess.
Look, the economy was a weakness for him throughout the campaign, and that was something that Trump really did capitalize on. And I would say probably for many of the 70 odd million people who voted for Trump, the economy was foremost in their minds. But coronavirus has, dictated and defined for many of us, what all of these other issues are become subsumed under that. And Biden's, I think, promise to address that and address that for everyone is certainly something that it gave him the leg up in November.
And we did ask in the survey a lot about the coronavirus, and we ask, we say that Donald Trump's approval rating has been mid 40s, low 40s all along, but not on the coronavirus. And this latest number, 37%. People are giving the outgoing president good grades on that. And obviously people continue to think this is not a hoax, that it's a big threat. They're worried about a whole bunch of things. And we did go through a list of ways people are even changing their behavior and have been.
Well, one of the things that I saw that was most interesting, and perhaps we can, segue into some of those questions, because as you point out, Lee, we did ask a good number of questions on this survey also about COVID-19. And one of the things that I found really interesting was the change that we saw from the numbers from the campaign period to now. And so at the end of the summer, we sort of saw this, balance of, around 6 in 10 Americans saying that they, would have confidence to take a vaccine should they have the opportunity afforded to them. And then during the campaign, these numbers got scrambled. I think it was probably the debating, the rhetoric. But this time around, what we see is we're back to those end of summer numbers. 61% of Americans actually say that if a vaccine becomes available to them, that they will in fact take the vaccine. And again, this is a jump from 49% in September, and we saw those numbers were pretty low during the campaign. There's certainly a partisan divide on this as we look down, but I think it's really interesting, particularly the fact that most people do see the coronavirus as a real threat, and a lot of people are also taking precautions. Were you guys surprised about that?
Actually, yeah, partly, but what stood out is what you just mentioned, which is this election. In the middle of the election campaign, all kinds of numbers changed, and they've reverted. Another one that reverted that stood out to me is do people think there should be a national mandate requiring people to wear a mask? That went from 74% in August. We asked in October, and it was 65%. It's back up to 73%. And I think it gets at something that maybe gives us a little hope, along with these numbers you're referring to, of people's seriousness about this. Lots of 70s and 80s% of people thinking it's important. They're wearing a mask when they go outside the house, all of that stuff. I think one of the things that gives me a little bit of hope here is that the campaign and the campaign messaging and the heat of the campaign maybe brought out kind of the worst in people in terms of their opinions and what they did. And I don't mean this in a way that is directed at any given person or any given party. I think that in a heat of a campaign, we're not necessarily our best selves. And now that the campaign is over, it strikes me that these numbers, this mask mandate is a good example. The vaccine, taking the vaccine is a good example. If Joe Biden is able to, from the White House, lectern, podium, say, we've got to have masks. You got to wear them for the next 100 days. And this is what he says he's going to do. There's evidence here that there is support for that now with less of the heat of the campaign. There's evidence, there's support that people will be taking the vaccine. There's evidence that people support the idea of wearing a mask every time they leave the house and of not gathering at restaurants or other indoor places. So I think we actually have some good signs in this poll about the lessening of the rhetoric and how that might help us get through this.
But I'll take the position on this though. How could people at this point not be careful about what's going on? First of all, we have some hope that there's the cavalry's on the way, that there are vaccines coming up. So if we just hang in there this extra 100 days that Joe Biden is talking about, and again, that suggests that he's got some opportunity there. But 1 in 3 people in South Dakota has tested positive. 1 in 3. How much more do you need to know? We're now having, I saw some numbers about just the fatalities in the worst days in American history, and it seems that the coronavirus in the last 2 weeks is setting like 6 or 7 of the top 10 days. It's competing against 9/11, Pearl Harbor, Gettysburg, Antietam. I mean, this is real. The invasion, Normandy. This is just such a horror show. And then we asked, and sure, 51% considered traveling for the holidays to be a major risk. But the lessons of Thanksgiving alone, I mean, show that, there's groups, 22 people, and they've all got it. They all have tested positive.
Well, but the thing is, I think many people, I mean, the thing though is that many people are taking pause. We did find, in this poll that, almost across the board. I mean, you're literally talking, a very small proportion of people who are not doing these things, wearing a mask or facial covering when they leave their home, washing their hands more often, avoiding large gatherings. These numbers are 88%, 87%, cutting back on places they go, 84%. I mean, I think we've gotten to the point where people are taking this very, very seriously. Fewer Americans, 62%, said that they got themselves vaccinated against the flu in order to protect, minimize the risk should they get coronavirus. But I think it really has hit home for many Americans. And I wonder how much is it the lens that we're looking at, and kind of the negative news and the exceptions, rather than kind of the sacrifices that many Americans, have been making.
Last thing before we go, I just want to point out that we asked if Americans think the federal government is doing enough to provide economic relief during the coronavirus pandemic. And I mention this because what's happening in Washington as we record this, there is an effort to get another relief bill out. 67% of adults and 66% of registered voters say that the Congress has not done enough. That includes 46% of Republicans think that Washington has not done enough. There is broad support. Here's another case where we actually don't have as big a partisan divide. There's a divide, but there is a broad amount of support to do something to address what's happening with the jobless claims that are going up week after week right now. And I'm hopeful that we see these kinds of numbers, and that somebody in DC, mainly the leaders, are paying some attention. Maybe they're even listening to Poll Hub. Who knows? If you are, hey guys, good luck. Please get to work and do what the American people want.
I think that's the beginning of a segue for you, Jay. So why don't you take it home?
Well, that will do it for this edition of Poll Hub, and hopefully, our leaders in Washington, at least a few of them, do listen, because I think we provide some insight. We are a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College at Poughkeepsie, New York, and Mary Griffith is our executive producer. Casey Schaff is our production supervisor. Amelia Morel, Leo Ruiz, and Madeline Jones are our production assistants, and Marcello Bettman is our trusted, that's new in the script here, a trusted editor. And he is.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Well, we do have a lot of trust.
We have trust. We have the faith.
He could make us look so bad.
We always take this opportunity also to thank the Roper Center Archives at Cornell University. And we've been talking about Joe Biden. And I did come across my desk, at the risk of my executive producer now getting very unhappy with me, a question that Gallup asked in 1936, which was collected in the Roper Archives. And this question was, should President Roosevelt name any more women to his new cabinet? At the time, there was only one female, and that was the first one. Frances Perkins was Secretary of Labor from 1933 to 1945. That was it. The next woman was 1953 during the Eisenhower administration. Well, in 1936, 31% of the country said yes, 57% said no. So for those who don't think we've at least made some change, right now Joe Biden has named 5, and he's got a whole bunch of potential people still to go. So that was my Roper nugget for the day.
Well, thank you very much,
You're quite
Lee.
welcome.
And if anyone has any comments or questions, either on Lee's jewel of a find in the Roper Archives, please reach out to us on social media. We're at Marist Poll on Twitter and Marist Poll on Facebook and Instagram. And please, finally, if you like what you hear on Poll Hub, please leave us a review on your podcasting app of choice. Positive reviews do help others find us. And while you're at it, go ahead and subscribe. So that will do it. And be safe, be well.